I feel like we've spent the last 50 years designing houses for the wrong moment. Like they've been designed for that one dinner party where you invite friends over for once a month? Or the one time in your life you may consider selling the house and you have to photograph it? Those are real moments, sure, but they make up such a tiny fraction of the time we actually spend in our homes. Most of life in a house happens on an ordinary Tuesday evening, when dinner's over and somebody still has homework to finish, or somebody else is making tomorrow's lunch. Maybe one person just wants to sit down with a book for 20 minutes, and another wants to watch a game. And maybe the kids are building something or working on a hobby. You're all home together, but nobody necessarily wants to be doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. And that's what got me thinking that we spent decades optimizing our homes for entertaining guests, while forgetting what everyday family life probably actually looks like. This house was originally designed in the early 60s for what the architect called a sociable family. The kitchen's separated from the rest of the house. There's a formal living room, a formal dining room, and what they called a rec room, and there's even like a maid's room. On paper, it feels like a collection of spaces that modern home designs have spent decades trying to eliminate. I mean, we no longer have live-in maids, right? And I don't like segregating the person in the kitchen from the rest of the house. But for some reason, the plan still felt a little cozy. This house wasn't trying to get everyone into the same room. It was trying to create different ways for the family to spend time together without forcing everybody into the same activity. For me, growing up, I had a friend whose family lived in a ranch house. And whenever we'd go over, we didn't disappear into their bedroom and just close the door. We were building forts and playing games and wandering outside and coming back into the kitchen because something smelled good, and then disappearing again. We weren't sitting with the adults all night, but we were constantly moving in and out of the life of the house. Looking back, it never felt like we were isolated from everyone else. It felt like we were all spending the evening together, just in different ways. Now, maybe that's just the nostalgia talking, or maybe the house itself had something to do with it. So instead of taking this ranch house and turning it into another open concept floor plan, I wanted to try a different experiment. My goal wasn't to redesign the house from scratch and prove that 60s design had everything figured out. I wanted to understand what this design was trying to accomplish. Figure out which ideas still make sense for the ways families live today, and then carefully just fine-tune the design without losing the thing that made it special in the first place. The first thing that stood out to me was that this house already had two very different ways to gather. On one side was a formal living room, a quieter space where you could have a conversation, read a book, or simply sip a cup of coffee. On the other side was a rec room, much more casual place where kids could play and games could happen or the television could be on without taking over the entire house. That's interesting because today we tend to combine all those activities into one room and hope they peacefully coexist. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So I decided those two personalities were worth preserving. The bigger question was the kitchen. Historically, kitchens weren't really social spaces. They were workspaces where the person who's doing the work was kind of hid from the rest of the house. But today, it's almost the opposite. The kitchen has become the center of everyday life. It's where people naturally gather, where conversations happen while dinner's being made, where homework gets spread across the counter, and where everyone somehow shows up at the end of the day. So I wasn't convinced the kitchen should stay isolated. But at the same time, I didn't want it to open to the entire house either. If I did that, I'd lose the very thing that made this plan interesting. Instead, I started wondering if the kitchen really belonged with the rec room instead. These two spaces already shared that same casual personality, and connecting them would make this side of the house feel much more alive, while still allowing the living room to remain its own quieter destination. That felt like a much better balance. The next room I struggled with was the formal dining room. Honestly, my first instinct was just delete it. Formal dining rooms are one of those spaces that people constantly say they never use. But I'm not sure because I was looking at the rooms by their labels instead of the opportunities they created. Maybe this doesn't need to be a dining room anymore. But does it still need to be here? I thought the answer was yes, because families need places that don't have a single job. Maybe it's where someone paints, or it's a music room, or library, or homework room, or even just a quiet place to escape the television for a while. The room isn't valuable because of what it's called. It's valuable to me because it gives the family another choice. And I think that's something we've slowly been designing out of our homes. Let me know, would you keep this room separate or just maybe even make the living room larger? By this point, I feel like I wasn't really redesigning a ranch house anymore. I was just trying to preserve this way of living. Not by copying the past, but by asking what ideas still deserve to have a place in a modern home. As I began to model this in 3D, I had to make myself one promise. I wasn't going to remodel the house until I spent some time with the original. So before I changed anything, let's let this 60-year-old house become real. I noticed as I was putting the walls in, just how simple this plan really is. There's nothing particularly flashy happening here. It's a straightforward series of rectangles with a few projections, modest roof lines, and windows placed more for the interior of the rooms than the exterior composition. In today's world, where so many homes are trying to create dramatic curb appeal, there's something refreshing about how this plan seems to care more about the people inside than out. It's not trying to impress you from the street. It just wants to be a good place to live. This house actually doesn't feel compartmentalized, it just feels layered. You can stand in one room and sense that something else is happening nearby without necessarily seeing everything all at once. That feeling is difficult to communicate with the floor plan, and it's something you only begin to notice once the walls are standing around you. The recreation room also stood out. Looking at the original plan, I assumed it would feel like an extra wasted space, almost like an oversized den. Instead, I feel now like it has a real presence. You can immediately imagine it becoming the everyday heart of the house. Not because it's like formal, but because it's relaxed. The living room, it almost has the complete opposite feeling. Even though it's in the middle, it feels quieter and more protected from the activity. Even without furniture, you can tell it wants a different kind of conversation. That contrast suddenly made the original idea of a sociable family make much more sense to me. Not every gathering in just one room, but different rooms supporting different ways of spending time together. Then the roof went on, and that's usually the moment a project finally starts feeling like a house. Up until then, it's mostly just a fancier floor plan. But once the roof ties everything together, the proportions start to settle in, and you begin to understand what the design was trying to create. And I really did like this design more than I expected. Not because it was perfect or because it was like super comfortable, it just felt right. And maybe again, it's just nostalgia talking, but sometimes you just get a feeling when you could picture yourself in the space and feel at home. Is that just me? But that's what made the next part a little difficult, because the more time I spent with the original design, the less I wanted to change it, which is probably a good sign, because if I was going to make changes, they needed to make the house better, not just newer. So with a much better understanding of what makes this house work, I'm finally ready to start the redesign. The first thing I tackled was the entry. One of the ideas I kept coming back to was that this house deserved a better arrival. The original entry worked, but it immediately revealed the living room and all the activity that's happening inside, while also feeling cramped right when you first walk in. So as I started moving walls around, I found that relatively small adjustments made a big difference. By pushing the coat closet farther into the house, I was able to create a small nook with a bench for taking off shoes, while also making the living room feel more protected from the front door. The kitchen was where I spent the most time thinking through it. Not because it was the biggest room, but because it was the biggest decision. I never wanted this project to become another giant open concept house. That would have been an easy solution. Instead, I kept asking myself where connection actually mattered. For me, the answer was between the kitchen and the rec room. Those spaces already shared a similar personality. They were informal, they were active, they're where everyday life naturally happens. So opening the wall allowed those spaces to work together without bringing in the quieter living room to become part of that same experience. One of my favorite changes came from something that doesn't even exist where I live, the basement stairs. Since basements are almost unheard of here in my part of Texas, that entire portion of the plan became a great opportunity. Rather than inventing another room, I just turned it into a walk-in pantry connecting between the garage and the kitchen. It's one of those features that probably won't show up in a real estate listing, but I think really improves everyday life more than anything else I just changed. The flex room ended up being exactly what I had hoped it'd become. I intentionally resisted giving it one specific identity. Maybe it's where the kids spread out a puzzle, or it's an art room, or somewhere where someone works from home a few days a week. Maybe it's simply somewhere to escape the television without disappearing upstairs to a bedroom. The more I worked on the design, the more convinced I became that the room's greatest strength wasn't what it was, but what it could be. By the time I finished the remodel, something interesting had happened in my mind. I wasn't really thinking about open versus closed floor plans anymore. I wasn't thinking about modern versus traditional. I was thinking about the choices I made, and how every change I made was trying to answer one question. Does this house give a family more ways to spend time together, without requiring everyone to do the same thing or to be in the same room? With the building finished, I reached my favorite part of the process. Because the moment I start placing furniture, I stop thinking about drawings and start thinking about people. A house doesn't really come to life until you can imagine yourself living in it. The first space I finished was, of course, the entry. It's a relatively small area, but I think entries set the tone for the entire house. By moving the closet further in the plan, there was finally room for a simple bench, a place to sit down, take off your shoes, drop your keys, or set a bag after work. It's not a dramatic architectural move, but it's the first reminder that this house is designed for everyday routines, not just first impressions. From there, I moved into the living room. As the furniture came together, I found myself resisting the temptation to make it the star of the house. Instead, I just wanted it to feel comfortable. I wanted it to be quiet and almost a little tucked away. This isn't the room where everything has to happen. It's where you can read a book while someone else is making dinner, or have a conversation without competing with the television. The rec room had almost the exact opposite personality of the living room. As soon as the furniture started going in, it immediately felt like a place where everyday life naturally collects. Someone's watching a game, kids are building, maybe there's a board game. It's active without feeling chaotic, and because it's connected to the kitchen, everyone is still within earshot of one another without all sharing the same activity. That connection between the rec room and the kitchen ended up becoming one of my favorite parts of this design. Once I started laying out the kitchen and the breakfast nook, I realized just how much these spaces depend on imagining daily routines instead of perfect photographs. I wasn't thinking about magazine covers, I was thinking about where somebody might take coffee before work, or someone helping with homework while dinner was cooking, a quick breakfast before school, one person standing at the island while another sits nearby just talking about their day. Those little interactions happen almost without thinking, and I wanted the kitchen to support them without taking over the entire house. The bedrooms came last, and they're likely the thing that mostly stayed the same from the original. But in reality, I feel like the more these rooms are just as places to transition to and from sleep, the more the family's inclined to join in the other rooms, rather than seclude themselves in their bedrooms. The biggest thing I took away from this project, it wasn't about whether the floor plan worked, or did I leave enough space for HVAC, or would the trusses be deep enough. It was, would I want to spend an evening here with my family on a Tuesday night, and every following night? Maybe not every wall is in the right place, and maybe there isn't enough storage, or the bathroom layout's clunky or whatever, and it can be optimized. In the end, this is a space where I can be with my family together, even with those imperfections. At first, I was redesigning an old ranch house, but in the end, it stopped being about the house. It became a question about how families actually live together. I don't think the original design was trying to maximize square footage with the right combination of bedrooms and bathroom mixes for resale, or to create the most impressive house on the block. I think they were trying to design for everyday life. For those evenings when everyone is home, everyone's doing something different, and somehow it still feels like you're spending time together. I don't think we've completely lost that idea as a society. There are plenty of things modern homes do incredibly well, and I certainly wouldn't want to go back to designing every house exactly like the original one. But I do question if lately we became so focused on making one room do everything that we stopped asking whether every activity really belongs in the same space. Maybe the connection isn't about removing every wall. Maybe it's just about giving people enough places to be themselves without feeling disconnected from everyone else. That's something I don't think I fully appreciated before I worked on this house. So now I'm curious, what do you think? Would you rather have one large room where everyone does everything at the same time? Or several smaller places where everyone can do different things while still feeling connected? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for coming along with me on this. And remember, stay curious and design with intent.